If your project uses Sprint Security, then you will need to configure cross-origin configuration in your Sprint Security. And in this video, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go to my security package that contains web security configuration. It's a class which enables web security, and this class extends web security configure adapter. So in this class where we configure the HTTP security object, I will enable cross-origin configuration. So right here, I will add one more line and I will use dot and then type CORS. And this will enable the cross-origin configuration. I will also need to add and it should work like this. So if I hold command button and then click on CORS to open its declaration, I can read documentation what it does. So it says adds a CORS filter to be used. If a bean by the name CORS filter is provided, then CORS filter is used. Else, if CORS configuration source is defined, then CORS configuration is used. So I'm going to define CORS configuration source in this class. So I'll go back to web security, and below all the methods here, I will add one more method, which is going to be public. And this method will need to return CORS configuration source, and I can also call it a CORS configuration source. And I will paste a few lines of code here and we'll walk you through. Well, first of all, I will import CORS configuration source into my class. I will import CORS configuration source from org Spring Framework Web CORS. And now I will import CORS configuration from org Spring Framework Web CORS. And now I will configure the CORS configuration object. And the first line of code is to set allowed origins. We now know that there can be multiple of origins. Our RESTful Web Service API can receive HTTP requests from multiple different origins. So we can configure our CORS configuration to accept multiple origins. I will import arrays from Java util. So I'm using asterisk to specify that any origin is allowed. But if you wanted to specify a particular origin, for example, HTTP localhost and then a particular port number, then you can do so, or provide a list of different origins that you want to allow to send HTTP requests to your RESTful Web Service API. For this project, I will allow all origins. And the next line of code is to set allowed methods. We can also specify specific methods like get, post, put, delete, or we can also add options here. Or we can use asterisks to specify that all HTTP methods are allowed. Then we will set allowed credentials if we want credentials to be included in HTTP response, for example. And credentials here are cookies or authorization headers, or it could be SSL client certificates. So if we want to allow this information to be included, we set the allow credentials to true. And then we can also configure the allowed headers. We can make a list of specific headers that we want to allow, or again use asterisks to allow all HTTP headers. And the final piece of code here is to configure URL-based CORS configuration source. I will import it first. I'll import it from org Spring Framework Web CORS. And here I need to provide the URL path patterns. Again, if I want to specify a specific path, for example, I will say users and then login. I can do that. Or I can specify any path using this expression, and this will be more flexible. Okay, so I have my CORS configuration source configured, and the final step here is to make this method return a bean. Like this. Let me import bean. And I can save my web security class now, and I can run this application and see how it works. So I'm going to run it as Spring Boot app, bring up my console, my application started, and now I will need to test it and see if it works. And I can do it by sending HTTP request to a login. For example, we know that a user's login is being managed by our Sprint security, and unless I configure CORS configuration for my Sprint security, I will not be able to send asynchronous JavaScript to my users /login to log in from a different origin. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring up Postman and create a new user. Here's my Postman, here's my HTTP post request to create a new user. So I'm going to send this request, and I get back a message that says that it was unable to load AWS credentials, but this is fine. I'm recording this video on a computer that doesn't have access key or secret key configured. If I get this message, this means that user was successfully recorded into a database, but email message with the request to confirm user email address was not sent. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring up browser window, and I'm going to log in into my H2 console so that I can manually update my email verification status from false to true. So I'm going to open localhost and then port number on which my project is running, context path of my project, and then /H2 console. Now I'm going to sign in and select all from users. Here's I have one user that I have just created, and email verification status is set to false. So I'm going to update users, and I'm going to set email verification status to true, like this. And now I will run the selected query, and I will select all from users again. So email verification status is now set to true, and I should be able to log in. Now I'm going to go to NetBeans, and in NetBeans I have email verification HTML page that we have already tried, and I also have prepared a login page that also sends HTTP request, but this HTTP request is to perform a login. So again, this is a very simple HTML page that includes jQuery, and then in the header block it has a JavaScript code that uses jQuery, and when the document is ready, it calls a function called perform login, and this function is right here. So this function contains settings, and in the settings I specify that this is going to be a synchronous request, it's going to be cross-domain, and the URL to the web service endpoint, which is running on localhost port number 8088, the context path, and then login. I'm going to perform login, and this is going to be HTTP post, some headers to specify that this is a content type, application JSON, and cache control, no cache, this is optional. And what's important here is that we have data. This is going to be a JSON payload that will contain credentials which I use to log in. So if I go back to my Postman, I have just created a user with email address test1@test.com and password 123. So exactly same credentials I'm using here, test1@test.com and password 123. Now the page is called login HTML. I'll go back to my Safari, and here I will use, instead of email verification, I will use login HTML and hit enter. And I will now go to a login page, and I get a status 403, which means that access is denied. Now what I will do, I will go back to my NetBeans. I'll just double check the URL. So it's mobile app /login. I think we have users here. Users before the login. I will save it, and I will go back to my Sprint tool suite, and we'll double check the path to the login endpoint. Yes, the users goes before login. This is how I configured my authentication filter. Okay, so let's try one more time. I'll go to a browser window, and now I will refresh the page, and this time it is successful. So if I switch to network, the HTTP request to login is successful. the HTTP status is 200, I was able to perform a login. And if I scroll down in the response, I should be able to see the authorization header and the user ID. Okay, so I can also switch to Resources tab and then select the HTML page and then put a breakpoint in the function that is called when HTTP request is done. If I repeat this HTTP request again, the breakpoint should trigger, which confirms that my JavaScript was able to receive back a successful response. So if I refresh this page, my breakpoint is triggered, which confirms that it is working. I will resume debugging and go back to my Sprint tool suite. We're done here, but if you want to experiment and see if it's really working, you can provide, for example, a different value for allowed origins. Let's say we allow HTTP request only from a website that is called appsdeveloperblog.com. So now if I run this project, I will not be able to send HTTP request to perform a login from a local host. Let's try doing that. So I will run my application, open up my console, my application is started, and now I will switch back to Postman and I will first create a new user. A new user is now created. I will now switch to my Safari and I will go to H2 console. I will log in again, paste SQL to update users so that email verification status is set to true. I will run it. Okay, email verification status is now updated and I should be able to log in. But if I switch back to my login page, so this is my login HTML, and if I send this HTTP request to perform login, I should not be able to do it. Let me switch to a console, and here I get an error message that pre-flight response is not successful, that HTTP request cannot load due to access control checks. Well, pre-flight is a kind of HTTP request that is sent even before actual HTTP request is the HTTP request that browsers send when needed. And if you're a front-end developer, then normally you don't create these pre-flight requests yourself because they are being created by the browser. So we already see that the browser did check and it does not allow to receive HTTP response if the server side does not have cross-origin configured for this web service endpoint. So we see that our cross-origin configuration for Sprint security is configured correctly. We can remove the apps developer block and use asterisk to allow all origins. Quickly rerun our application, check if it has started, and repeat our request. And now we get 403. This is because we have restarted our application, all users were deleted, but we already see that there is no complaint that this is a cross-origin request. Okay, so let's continue.